Okay, welcome back. This is the second lecture for Unit 10. The art medium that we're going to be talking about for Unit 10 is graphic design. One of the things you may not notice because you're not in the art building, the online students, you may not notice that pretty much all of the media that I have, all the different art disciplines that I've focused on have been somewhat related to the things that we teach in our art programs. That's one of the reasons why I made sure to include illustration and graphic design in these last two units is because we teach classes in both of those. We have a degree in an emphasis in graphic design. And and so like illustration, graphic design is what we often refer to as a commercial art. And I think that that's a bit of a tricky or suspect term because after all, um, you know, in many times, like let's say the age of Rubens, all art is commercial, right? Like that artists have been making money from art, um, for pretty much most of the history of art. But there is something different when artists are employed by corporations for work that is then going to be sent to large scale publication for then being, disseminated for uh, big markets, large, audiences. And so by that definition of commercial, meaning not just that someone gets paid, but commercial in the sense that it's a large industry, it's a mass market industry. That yes, graphic design and illustration share that in common. And I think also graphic design, one of the reasons why we're talking about graphic design in this unit is because it ties in so well with the discussion of high modernism and also the discussion of the concept of design, the kind of 20th century model of what design is. And because one of the things we will see in that lecture is how places like the Bauhaus really saw all of this being unified. That like the education for a young graphic designer and the education for a young architect and the education for a young painter or a young sculptor should all begin in the same basic fundamental place. They should all learn the foundation of design, and then those foundations then build to the discipline that they work in. So that's one thing this lecture is going to be about. The other major thing is just kind of explaining in a series of examples what is graphic design. And it's kind of a complicated field. I guess the first thing I would try to make sure everyone understands is that graphic design is not art on a computer. Although many graphic designers today work on computers, if you studied graphic design as if you were getting a degree in it, um, then you would certainly be working digitally. You'd be working on a computer, doing most of your work that way. But just because that's the primary tool the graphic designers use today, that does not mean that graphic design didn't exist before the existence of the computer. In fact, most of the artwork that we're going to be looking at today was made long before people were using computers for graphic design. And um, and similarly, what matters is not, you could make artwork on a computer and it not be graphic design. What matters has a lot more to do with the relationship with the client and the goals of communication. If you're making work that is, primarily involving text as well as some imagery, but text is really important. If you're making work that is for publication, to be reproduced and for publication, if you're making work for a relatively large audience, if you're making work that is about visual communication as well as actual text communication, if you are working for a client trying to help them find a way to visually communicate things like their brand identity or making sure that people understand that they sell sandwiches on every Tuesday, right? That is, that's the field of graphic design. Um, and the two fundamental things that I want to focus on in terms of like some foundational aspects of graphic design is typography and logo design. Typography is primarily the use of type, the use of letter forms in art, in graphic design, and logo design is kind of like that fundamental skill about trying to figure out how to make in a very simple mark, in a very simple organization of shapes, something that communicates very clearly an idea or an identity. So we are going to start. First thing I wanted to cover a little bit is just think about the fact that, graphic design to a certain degree, if you define graphic design as art being paired with text to communicate points, then graphic design kind of existed before the existence of graphic design. And after all, um, we, the letterpress was invented, hundreds of years before this point here, where Lautrec is basically doing kind of an informal type of graphic design. And so, people were already working with type, already working with printed images paired with type. But it took a while for graphic design to really be understood as a separate art field, and for it to be really understood as a field that required training and education in of itself. But in the 20th century, graphic design really started to become conscious of itself as a field where there were artists who saw themselves as graphic designers, who were invested in the education of graphic designers. And that's really where we're going to begin. But I just wanted to remind you that just because this is where we're beginning, a lot of the groundwork was laid centuries before, right? I don't know. Baskerville was in, that particular typeface was made, I don't know, like something like in the 1700s. So, okay, so some of the other thing I want to say is that this lecture is pretty heavy on Americans. In this particular page, not both of these are Swiss designers, but it is primarily very heavy on American graphic designers. I apologize for that, but it's not, it's not a field I know as well as I know, let's say, painting. And so my knowledge is very kind of limited, and I wanted to focus on graphic designers that I knew pretty well. And so one of the things I want you to see from this image is that kind of that fundamental idea of a mark. Like even before we're really doing we're talking about actual logos here, but thinking about simplifying composition, simplifying a kind of a shape or a group of shapes for the purpose of communication, and making things very clean for the purpose so that they communicate as clearly as possible. This is a pretty famous ad campaign from the 50s, where Volkswagen was trying to introduce their vehicles into the United States and get people to really think about them as you know as an option besides American cars. And it was pretty novel and a very successful ad campaign. So one of the rest of the lecture is pretty much just going through various graphic designers. I'm just going to point out a thing or two about each one of them that I think what they say about graphic design as a field. Paul Rand is generally considered sort of like the designer's designer, the graphic designer who for many, especially American graphic designers, they really see him as almost the epitome of graphic design. And I would say that's for one main reasons. One is because of just his success and his focus on logo and logo mark. Just a logo mark is, hold on a second, I'm just about to get to my 1-minute warning. The logo mark is the abstract icon, usually oftentimes without even the letter form, but the logo mark is the abstract icon, and then that paired with the name. So like this paired with Westinghouse would then often be considered the full logo. So Paul Rand is noted for that, and he's also noted for being almost voiceless, like that his designs seem to change specifically for whatever the clients needed. All right, that's a good place for us to end. I'll meet you in the second part soon.